Hello, my name is Simon Double, and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And as ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Phil Boyle from BG Racing. Hi, Phil. How are you enjoying this very cold weather? I have to say, I'm not a fan, which is a major reason for me syndicating on the flat with those wonderful, hot, balmy summer days. They seem a distant memory.
They certainly do, yes. Obviously, with all of us having plenty of commitments over Christmas, I should explain to the listeners that we do record the January podcast nice and early. So we're sitting here in the middle of December, stuck in the middle of a cold snap at the time of recording, and we've had no jumps racing for about the last week.
Yes, 1 minute the talk is all about small size fields, and then there are no fields at all because winter has arrived a lot earlier than in recent years. Anyway, how has this weather affected your recent trip to Cheltenham?
Well, it did affect it. Little did I realise at the time that I was watching the last jumps action for quite a while, because I was at Cheltenham on the Friday of the December meeting, and that went ahead because they covered the whole of the track. And unfortunately, on Friday night, another night of frost started just as they were frantically trying to get the covers back down for Saturday's racing, and those temperatures meant that Saturday was frozen off. A lot of people at various racecourses have put huge efforts in to cover our tracks in recent days, and it's a pretty massive undertaking. But even with those covers, very low temperatures can still freeze the ground underneath. So, yeah, we had no racing in the Cotswolds on the Saturday, but we still had a nice day, did some Christmas shopping and had a nice lunch, and then woke up on Sunday morning to find the car under 3 inches of snow. That made driving a bit of a challenge, but on the upside, it turned the whole area into a winter wonderland, which was very pretty, if not quite conducive to horse racing.
Now, I agree about the racecourses putting in a lot of hard graft to try and keep the show on the road. And not only racecourses, Phil, but the various training centres as well. So Newmarket, where Solaria Racing has its horses trained, they've done a fantastic job in keeping the all-weather gallops open for exercise. So a big thank you to all the Newmarket Heath ground staff. And our guest today, listeners, is someone who's used to interviewing us on a regular basis last year. It's Frankie Foster, former Love Island contestant turned racing broadcaster. And this time we get to ask the questions.
Yes, Frankie's been great in helping us to showcase the thrill of shared ownership and been kind enough to give us the opportunity to plug the podcast as well. But it will be good to turn the tables and ask him some questions for a change.
Before we do, let's talk about what you've been up to, especially the Racehorse Owners Association Awards, which you attended.
Yeah, I did indeed. Sophie Watmuth from Great British Racing, who has organised all the shared ownership days this summer, invited us both. I know you were unable to make it, so I'm hoping I represented Inside the Rails well on the night. I know, however, you weren't missing out too much because you went to the Horse Racing Writers and Photographers Awards a few days before that as a guest of Turf Tracks. So did you see our former Inside the Rails guest, Mike Marr, and did you enjoy that event?
Very much so, very much so. I was on the same table as Mike, as he works with Steve Bird at Turf Tracks, and he's actually a near neighbour of mine. Small world. I was fortunate to have some very interesting guests on the table, including two clerks of the course, broadcaster Rishi Persad, and the great one and only AP McCoy. How's that? It was a lovely lunch, a very warm event. And by warm event, I mean warm in terms of atmosphere. Not only did I meet up with Mike, but also two other Inside the Rails guests, CEO of Perth Racecourse, Hazel Poplinski, and Racing Post writer Lee Mottershead. It was nice to meet them in person. So that was my lunch. What about your dinner?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the evening. I met one of the producers from ITV Racing at the drinks reception before we went into dinner, and that was great. I enjoyed finding out more about what goes into producing the racing that we watch on TV. And during dinner, I was with a couple of Racehorse Syndicates Association colleagues, Dan and Tina, and their respective spouses, along with two guys from Racing TV and our hosts from Great British Racing. Excellent company, and as far as the awards were concerned, it was great to see syndicates being nominated, and indeed one of them ended up winning. The Midland Park Racing horse, the Platinum Queen, was voted top juvenile of 2022.
I should just point out a little bit of jargon there. You used the word juvenile. Now, for the benefit of listeners, juvenile is the word we use to describe 2-year-old horses on the flat, young horses, while over the jumps, juvenile hurdlers, that would refer to 4-year-olds. And while novice chases are contested by 5 and 6-year-olds, so hopefully a bit of jargon busting there. Glad you enjoyed your bash, and well done to Midland Park Racing. Just going back to the HWPA awards I attended, it was great to see Sir Mark Prescott win the Flat Trainer of the Year award. He's always entertaining and good value, as well as being a shrewd trainer of handicappers, as you and I know very well, Phil. Host Ollie Bell tried to tease out of him if there were any well-handicapped horses he trained that we should look out for in the near future. Sir Mark, in inimitable style, said, "Not that I have any, but even if I did, I wouldn't be telling you about them." Classic Sir Mark.
It sounds like you were very well entertained, Simon. And yeah, on the racecourse, what about the Solario Racing runners this month?
No runners since our last podcast, but Sharp Distinction will be heading to Southall before Christmas, and we're hoping he can go one better than his fine second at Kempton last time out. But obviously by the time the podcast goes out, he'll have run. And hopefully he'll have won. Who knows? I did, however, host the annual Solario Racing Owners Christmas Lunch at an excellent Italian restaurant in Newmarket called Unico. Give them a bit of a plug. And as well as owners, we had trainer Amy Murphy, husband and assistant trainer Lemos de Souza, and jockey Stefano Cerci there. Now, Stefano, being Italian, certainly enjoyed the Italian cuisine. In fact, he told me it's one of his favourite restaurants. Nice, actually, to see a jockey really enjoying his food, I have to say. We had a Christmas quiz and a small awards ceremony of our own. All good fun, and we even managed to avoid being snowed in.
Good news. I've also got a Christmas lunch up at Epsom the day after we're recording this. It's also worth highlighting that most syndicates run social events like that, so just another reason why listeners should get involved in shared ownership if you're not already. And on the racecourse this month, BG Racing's just had the one runner. Far Too Beautiful had her second run over hurdles at Lingfield. And it was great that our former Inside the Rails guest, Tom Scudamore, came to ride her for us. She actually ran a nice race. Although she was quite well beaten, she finished where we hoped she would, as there were some very good horses in opposition and we were all racing off of level weight. So we were actually really pleased with her, and it looked like she'd have one more run. You have to have 3 runs to be assessed for a handicap mark over hurdles. And then we felt she'd be in with horses at her level and she should be competitive, and we'd have a load of fun with her over the winter. But yeah, very unfortunately, we discovered a few days after her race that she'd incurred a pretty serious injury. And yeah, that means that she's not going to be able to race for around 12 months.
I'm sorry to hear that, Phil. What will happen to her now?
Well, I've mentioned before that she's leased. She's leased from a breeder, really nice man called Richard Farley. So he was my first call to make him aware of the issue and discuss things with him. Obviously, from a syndication point of view, I would struggle to find people who would want to renew their shareholding for another year when she's unlikely to run in that time. So the only thing I can really do is return her to Richard, and he's currently deciding what he wants to do with her. She's not probably done enough on the racecourse to have value as a broodmare yet, so his options are probably to keep her himself or find someone that can give her the time to recover before they race her again, or find her a nice retirement as a riding horse for someone.
Now, we all place a lot of importance on equine welfare, and rightly so. I know I've had to retire horses in the past, either through injury or because they're not cut out to be racehorses. You know, they're not that quick, unfortunately. Couples spring to mind. We had a filly called Chiltern Secret in the early days of Solario Racing, who in racing terms was just not very quick. But she went off to the Midlands to do polo cross, and indeed was taken on by a young lady who played polo cross for England. More recently, we've had Don't Look Down, who suffered a pedal bone injury, was off for a long time, but he was taken on by one of his syndicate owners, and now he has a great life, hacking, jumping, and even competing. It's obviously difficult for owners, as you will know yourself, when things go wrong, but I know they've always appreciated the work that's gone into finding suitable homes.
Yeah, indeed. Both know that the highs of success definitely make up for the lows that arise when the horses are injured or not running as well as we hope. But generally everybody that does get involved builds a bond with their horse and really cares about them. I've had loads of messages from shareholders saying how sorry they are to hear that she's been injured. And they're all clearly thinking about the horse and her future rather than a sort of a what will happen to my shareholding attitude. And that's great. That supports us as syndicate managers. It puts the horse first, even if it means taking a bit of financial responsibility for ensuring that the horse gets the right medical support and a good home for the future.
Hear, hear to that, Phil. Hear, hear. And what about finding a replacement for Far Too Beautiful? Any joy there?
Yes, that took a lot less time than I thought it might. During COVID, many of the bloodstock auctions moved online. Most of the auctioneers have actually retained some of the online sales. Obviously, they found it works for them. And as it happens, there was a pre-Christmas sale online, which was organised by Tattersalls Auction House. We scoured the catalogue. We found 2 or 3 possible horses there. And I'm delighted that we managed to pick up a 2-year-old colt for a very small amount of money. He was second on his handicap debut, finished close up on his other run. So I'm sure we'll have some fun with him in the winter on the all-weather tracks. His name is Sajwan. And whilst I wouldn't normally plug things on the podcast, I'm sure to have some shares available. And a minimum purchase with BG Racing is just 1% of the horse. So if anybody wants to join us for some fun, by the time this goes out, he'll be on the BG Racing website, and a 1% share will probably only be £300 to £350 for the whole of 2023.
A bargain, Mr. B, a bargain. Well done on getting a replacement so quickly, and I'm sure all your shareholders will have a lot of fun with him, so good luck. And what about your take on the recent jumps action, Phil?
Indeed, not an original one, but I mentioned John Bond last month. He had his second start over fences and was just as impressive as he was first time. That being said, his stablemate who beat him in the Supreme Novices Hurdle last year at Cheltenham was Constitution Hill, and he looked absolutely brilliant when he won at Newcastle. We'll hopefully be seeing him again at Kempton over Christmas. And now that the unbeaten champion hurdler Honeysuckle is no longer unbeaten, she lost over in Ireland, it's very hard to see beyond Constitution Hill for the champion hurdle, especially if Honeysuckle goes for the mare's hurdle, as has now been discussed. Other performances of note were L'Homme Pressé, who won a handicap chase at Newcastle. I do love seeing these top-class horses being prepared to run in handicaps where they have to concede a lot of weight to their rivals, but it's great to see them win in that kind of company. And I probably also finally need to get on the Edwardstone bandwagon after he won the Tingle Creek chase at Sandown. He was our top novice 2-mile chaser last season, but he wasn't really at that kind of level over hurdles, and that always left me unsure about how good he really was. Well, I think he answered that quite emphatically when taking on the older horses for the first time and winning impressively. Trainer Dan Skelton and his brother Harry have had a fantastic time. They seem to be hoovering up a lot of the big races, or they certainly were before the freeze hit the jumps action. They won the Coral Trophy at Newbury with Lamilos. And their delight at that one was great to see. And finally, a word for Love Envoi, who was one for the syndicates. She's a Noel Feely Racing Syndicate's horse. She won at the Cheltenham Festival last year and won again on seasonal reappearance. So hopefully she'll have another great season for her shareholders. What about you, Simon? Did anything catch your eye?
Well, you're right about the Skelton brothers. From a personal angle, I was disappointed to see them win a Coral Trophy, as I'd backed Remastered, Jericho Rock and Corach Rambler, and they finished 2nd, 3rd and 4th, but all each way, so no real damage done. Looking ahead, I know my trainer Amy Murphy, who trains jumpers as well as flat horses, is eagerly awaiting the return of Kalashnikov, her Grade 1 winning chaser. He's not been seen since suffering a tendon injury in last year's Grade 1 Ryanair chase. But the 3 horses ahead of him that day, Allaho, Fakir Dudari and Tornado Flyer, have all won Grade 1 races since, so the form's been well and truly franked. Anyway, Kalashnikov's target is a Grade 3 at Wetherby, where he'll probably take on Ahoy Senor. Your Christmas racing fair you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to all of it. There's a great meeting at Leopardstown in Ireland, the Kempton meeting, and of course races like the Welsh Grand National and the Cheltenham New Year's Day meeting. I'm really looking forward to seeing the King George at Kempton on Boxing Day. We don't know the runners yet, but if Brave Man's Game and L'Homme Pressé are both in the lineup, then it'll be a mouth-watering clash. And were we to get Protectorat and or Noble Yates as well, then it'll be an even better race. And also Constitution Hill. He might win easily, but he's a great watch even when he does.
Yes, Constitution Hill. He's been described as a freak, a bit like Frankel, really. He's something like 4-11 for the champion hurdle in March. Now, on a different note, I'd just like to say good luck to Newmarket trainer Chris Wall, who's retired after 36 years as a trainer. Sadly, his last intended runner at Chelmsford didn't race as the meeting was abandoned due to the weather. Anyway, from Chris Wall to someone slightly younger, I'm delighted to say we have special guest Frankie Foster on the line. Good morning, Frankie. How are you?
Morning, Simon. Yes, very well, thank you. As I mentioned to you briefly, in the name of transparency, I am slightly slower than usual. Christmas party week, the racing TV party on Wednesday night is probably still slowing me down a bit, but besides that, I'm all good.
Well, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you. I guess you're carrying on the party from Amsterdam. I believe when we last spoke, you've had a few days out there. Did you have a good time?
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And to be honest, not that I'm ever wishing racing to be off, but if there ever was a weekend to take a break with the unfortunate weather, racing was cancelled. So I kind of switched off from racing for the weekend. And it was a great trip. It's the first time I've been to Amsterdam. And I was very impressed with it. Yeah, so it's a lovely place.
Yeah, nice place. I've been there a couple of times many years ago, but really enjoyed it when I went. Now, Frankie, we've just been mentioning that Chris Wall is retiring after 36 years as a trainer. So he was training 10 years before you were born. Wow. Now, look, it is great to have such a young ambassador for this great sport of ours. But before we get on to racing, many of our listeners will know you as a contestant from Love Island. Can you tell us about that experience? And indeed, what was the path that led you to appearing on the show?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back a while now. And I think it's funny when kind of Love Island and racing gets mentioned because of Chris Hughes does a bit of work in racing. Everyone goes, bloody hell, what these people go on TV and then decide they want to work in racing. But it's kind of the other way around for us. Me and Chris both grew up in Cheltenham and both loved racing, and then as a result of doing TV work, ended up doing some work and crossing over in racing, which is brilliant. But yeah, I mean, the path to get on Love Island is not the most exciting. You simply get asked, and I'd say 90% of people there is an application process, and it goes on year round. But 90% of people in there, for all people that do apply, have been scouted as such. So yeah, there's a team of people, and I remember chatting to two of the girls who were on the team that scout people, and so what do you do? And they said, oh, that's great, we go to modelling agencies, we go to nightclubs, we go to festivals, and we just have to find people. So I mean, maybe I'm in the wrong job. They seem like they were having great fun doing that. So yeah, it's a case of being asked, really.
And they call that work.
Exactly, yeah. And you know what, a funny story actually, linking back to racing, the reason I say that they always maybe put me on the show is because I came across as someone that wasn't really too bothered. I didn't watch the show. I wasn't overly enthused about going on it. It was more of a why not for me. But two of the interviews that you do before going on, I actually missed just from poor planning and bad timing. And on the day that I was supposed to be in London, somebody rang me and they said, hey, Frankie, bro. And I said, yeah. Hi, how are you? And she said, we've got you scheduled in. Have you not been able to make it? At the time, I'd completely forgot. And I was a couple of beers deep on my way up to Cheltenham Festival. So there was no chance of me getting to London for an interview because I was going racing festival week. But in the end, yeah, whatever I said in whatever interview came next, as I said, I think they liked the fact that I wasn't too bothered and they chucked me on.
Okay. Did you enjoy being on the show, and was that a springboard into a media career? In other words, did you always want to be in media and use Love Island as a stepping stone, or did it happen by chance?
By chance, definitely. And what's funny is, well, when you're on the show, it's great fun. And I didn't, as I said, I didn't take it too seriously. I wasn't somebody that was trying to get in the limelight or trying to get airtime on the show. I just went on and had a jolly, really. So, what's not to love about that? But it was the opposite. If you'd have asked me back then, did I like presenting? Did I like being on camera? Did I like all of these things? Probably would have said no. Wasn't really too bothered by it. I didn't try and push for, like I said, more airtime, more camera time, so on, so on. If you ask me now, I'd say I love being on camera and I love talking, I love presenting, and I love everything I do. I think the difference was back then, I didn't bother with reality TV. I didn't care so much about Love Island, so I didn't enjoy presenting because I wasn't presenting anything I really cared about. Whereas if you fast forward 4 years now and you ask me, like I said, if I enjoy talking and being on camera, then the answer is yes, because I've ended up presenting in sport and in racing, which I love. So it was by complete chance, really. And I never planned on kind of working in media or on TV or anything like that. But I'm glad I did. And you actually get loads of good experience. Like you get chucked in front of, live TV, live radio, all sorts of questions thrown at you. You get used to being mic'd up. You get used to being on telly, on camera, reshooting things, saying the same thing over again and trying to make it look good and all of these things. So it is actually really great if you're taking a more maybe a more professional view in looking back at it. It's actually great experience and great fun along the way. So yeah, at the time, no, it was by complete chance getting into media, but now I'm very thankful that it panned out the way it did.
Now, you're relatively new to racing broadcasting, and we'll come on to that shortly. But your love affair with racing, how did that start? You mentioned you were born in Cheltenham. Did that have something to do with it?
It did, yeah. You don't get too many options, do you, if you grow up in Cheltenham? Especially if you live close enough to town, you'll at least know what happens once a year when the festival just completely changes the town. If I could give you my actual first experience of knowing of racing, so I don't come from a racing family. My parents wouldn't really go racing. They might go once or twice, but they weren't overly bothered by it. The first bus I got off a racecourse was probably working in the fish and chip shop called Popeyes outside the train station. Some listeners may know it if they get the train to the festival. And we used to serve all of the race goers before and after racing. So that would be the first taste I actually got of any sort of buzz around Cheltenham. I was about 15 at the time. My first ever day's racing on a racecourse was Gold Cup day. So I didn't get off to a bad start. It was the Gold Cup that Bobsworth won. So I was still, you talk to a lot of people in racing and they might tell you, my granddad took me when I was 4 years old and so on and so on. I didn't go racing until I was 17. So I am, fairly fresh to it. And like I said, I didn't grow up with it. I didn't know anything about it. My first day's racing, I barely made it past the bar to see a horse. So I was a complete novice to racing. I just went for a day out. And then we had such fun that we went back and we built a good group of lads that went back over and over again that I grew up with in Cheltenham. And these kind of racing WhatsApp chats still exist today. We all still talk about racing. We've all gone deeper into the sport and learned more and more about it. So, and that relates to a lot of the work I do now. Is my journey into racing was, as I said, from a day out, having fun, going back, and then going back enough times to do more and more and more and more. So a lot of the work I do is trying to get people to go for that first day out and enjoy it, or maybe try to get them to come back for their second or third day out. And then if you do enjoy it and you keep coming back and you learn, one or two things along the way, and that interests you to learn a few more things and ask questions and then start following horses and form and having a bet and all the rest of it. So
Excellent, excellent. Well, Phil and I are always banging on about syndication and people enjoying themselves in racing. That's what it's all about. And we'll come on to syndication a bit later on. Now, you've interviewed Phil and I several times at the Great British Racing Ownership Days. How did your involvement with GBR and also Racing TV come about?
Yeah, so another, I guess you could say by chance, Love Island helped in ways. So as a racing fan and someone that never planned to work in racing, let's not call it work, but any involvement I had before last year to do with racing was all for fun. And I presented a few awards at Cheltenham. I'd done a few things for various companies. I'd got to know lots of people racing, but they were all, if I'm honest, favours for free beer. Is how I used to operate, which you can't make a career out of to start with. Because I wasn't working racing, it wasn't my intentions to get paid or to work, but I did get asked for some favours. I did some PR stuff. I did some press stuff around Cheltenham, growing up in Cheltenham and enjoying my racing. So I was at least somewhat known within racing by people that worked in media for liking my racing. And then Racing TV started the project, which I now work and run on, called Race Day, with the idea essentially is the colour of racing. So Racing TV main channel will cover your racing. That'll give you your hard racing, your racing analysis. And then Race Day will cover everything else that is included on a day at the races. And really, the girl that got Steph Jones, the girl that was heading up the project, had the task of finding people to present on it. And it was supposed to be people that liked their racing, but they were still fairly new into it or new into presenting. They could maybe bring a different angle. They could reach a different audience. And I don't know how she knew of me, but she took a chance and she rang me and said, "This is the project and the idea. Would you want to give it a go?" And as someone who likes racing, I said, "Yeah, why not? Of course, let's get going." It was July Cup at Newmarket. It was day one with Rosie Tapner. And the whole project was completely new. Everyone was kind of under the understanding that it was an experimental project and we're going to see what worked and what didn't. And if I'm honest, as a racing presenter, it was fantastic to get experience because I was working and no one was watching for a long time because the channel was small and new and no one knew who it was or what we were doing. And although lots of people watch now and, we hit millions of views on TikTok and Instagram, on my very first day, there probably must have been 5 people that were watching. So I got lots of experience under my belt, not on a big, live TV or a massive platform. So, yeah, it was something that came about by chance. And I didn't, I took the day's work saying, yeah, it'll be fun. And I even at the time, I didn't have plans to turn it into a career or something I did full time, but I just really enjoyed it. People were happy with what I did, and kind of more work kept coming my way. And hence, you asked how did I get involved with Great British Racing? That kind of sprung me on to things like that, and working with the Jockey Club and Great British Racing and various race courses. So it was just a snowball effect, really. But that was my first day, was the Racing TV project.
No, that's great. And obviously, Simon and I have been interviewed by you on camera several times, but all the while that we're promoting syndication, we know that you're also keen to promote it. And I think you've now got a share of a horse, haven't you? Can you tell us a bit about that and the story so far?
I do, yes. I'm so kind of happy to have took this step. I think getting a share of a race horse is essentially going a step deeper beyond, let's say if we were talking that journey when I went and as I said, barely made it past the bar. You have your casual race goers, and then you have people that might buy a membership to Cheltenham, for example, or their local track, and then it's kind of that one step further, which just enhances your racing experience once again. So yeah, I've got a share in a filly, Kahana Breeze. She raced 3 times this year. I went to see her once, and as someone who likes to keep a cool head and not give too much away, I've got to admit I was very, very nervous. And this was it's funny. We obviously I spend most of my time talking about Grade 1 races, and I was watching a Class 5 at Wolves, and I don't think I've been more nervous or / more excited for any other horse race that I've watched. And she actually didn't run too well at all that day, but no, it's been great from getting involved. I think it must have been around June time. She was unraced at the time. And then going down to Archie's a couple of times, meeting the other syndicate members, and a few of them have had horses together and had some success in the past. So they were brilliant to kind of buddy up with almost, because they've done this a few times. They've had some good and some bad days, and they've created almost a friendship where they'll go racing as a group off the back of horses that they've been involved in together. So that was brilliant to go and meet them down at Archie's, and then, like I said, to go and see her race, fantastic.
Glad that you've joined the syndicate ranks, and I certainly share, after 28 years, the nervousness about horses running when they're your horses. So I do empathise with that, definitely. Your racing broadcasting career is relatively recent, but can you give us any amusing or embarrassing moments in your career to date?
Embarrassing moments. Now, I've got one that's mildly, how should we say, it's less PG, and slightly unprofessional. But you did ask for amusing and embarrassing, so we'll go with it.
Go on,
I've
far
got
away.
a, I've got a friend of mine who I've met through racing, and this is the great thing about racing is you meet all sorts of characters, and this
Sure.
man is a character. He's a proper Scouser, and he owns, let's call it, a gentleman's club in Liverpool.
Okay.
I've got 3 days work at entry, and every day he says, "Look," he said, you don't have to bother staying in the club all night. I know you want to go out and do anything. I don't expect you to be in a strip club every day, essentially. But if you do want to come in, you can have drinks on the house. So you can come in, have some drinks, say hello to me after racing, and then crack on with your night. So that's what we did. And we did that every night for 3 nights. We went and had a few drinks, said hello. He loves his racing. He'd been at the course, and then on we went, off to whatever we were doing, or on to bed and to work the next day. But after 2 nights of going in there, I was presenting on a Saturday, and I'm interviewing someone, and as I am, one a race goer behind me pops his head over and in between the conversation and says, "Oh, did you have a good time in so and so last night?"
Uh-huh.
so so I got called out for my friend having a club in Liverpool, and I got spotted by a few race goers for sure. So that was quite amusing, and it wasn't live TV, so we were safe. But yeah, it was quite amusing, and I think that's something I love about what I do is, this fella was not being nasty. He was having a laugh with it, and I meet so many people, and from being on the track to going for a beer after racing, I get recognised a lot these days in racing. But people always want to just come and have a chat and have a laugh. But yeah, if it was live TV, there might be a good interesting snippet out there somewhere. But thankfully, I control most of what gets cropped and edited, so it didn't go much further.
Okay. I guess that's the price of being in the public eye, isn't it? Your time's never necessarily your own, but a price worth paying. I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Now, look, we've loved having you on. A question we love to ask our guests: if there were three things, and only three things, please, that you could change for the better in British racing, what would they be?
Yeah, tricky one. I think the first thing that always springs to mind for me, I guess, because of the work I do, and this is not, it's not like a structural change or anything. It's almost like a cultural change, I guess. But a lot of the work I do is to break down that barrier of, I'm sure you've heard this before many times. The words that always kind of come to mind. Somebody will say, "Oh, but I don't know anything about racing." And it's trying to break that down and make people realize that there is a lot to know about racing. There's loads of interesting things, and you can dive as deep as you want into the sport. But at surface level, nobody cares if you don't know anything about racing. You can come and have a great time, and you can ask questions, and you can learn. So I think if I was to, as I said, change something, that's not a structural change or anything like that, but to have less people scared to ask questions. A real obvious one, which I'm sure everybody says, is whether it's field sizes or whether it's just competition, but to get more of the top horses racing against each other. I'm a big Cheltenham advocate, and I honestly don't mind the road to Cheltenham. I never get bored of Cheltenham podcasts. I'm one of those that doesn't actually care, and for lots of people will moan about there's more than just Cheltenham. We need to get races throughout the year. I don't actually kind of stand in that camp, but I don't always like to see, John Bond, for example, has had 2 walkovers and he won't race anything until he hits Cheltenham. I think there could be slightly more clashes earlier on. Like you see in Ireland, it's slightly harder for them to avoid each other because there's lots of Grade 1 horses and they inevitably meet. We don't get that so much here, and it's probably just because the fixture list is too big and they can choose the races they like and go and win them. And I'm not saying that it's I don't think it's a trainer's fault, because if I was a trainer, God, I'd be trying to find a nice race that I could go and win easily and not test my horse and get him safe and sound to the festival. So I definitely wouldn't be blaming the trainers. It's probably a matter of too much racing, as everybody in the media has been talking about for a while now, and just condense the fixture list and get those clashes happening. And I think that would make it all the more exciting. And then one more. I mean, let's talk about syndication. We should, shouldn't we? We should have a syndication one. A point that the great man Shark Hanlon, legend of the sport, a great character in the sport, a great point that he made was that you might have 10 horses racing, and this isn't always the case. But he said, how often can you look around the parade ring and not see many owners? And there's not owners on course, because there's these big players and they haven't, they're not syndicate horses and so on and so on. Now, if you swap that and you think about when Flooring Porter won at the festival and there was those 10, 15 Irish lads going absolutely berserk, because I think that's a great syndication story, actually. They bought that horse relatively cheap and, they've had wonderful days with it. But if you contrast those two images of a buzzing syndicate group in the parade ring versus big owners not in the parade ring, then it looks very different for racing. And I think you've got to work towards a packed parade ring where there are groups of owners or owners in the parade ring. They all know who each other are. We all know which horses they own. They all know kind of who's who. And there's that friendly buzz and friendly competition within the parade ring of owners. I think that, can only be good for the sport. And if you can't get, bloody people that own the horses racing, then it doesn't bode well for everybody else. But yeah, I think there's got to be some focus on the owners and kind of getting that almost friendly rivalry and that buzz in the parade ring, because we don't want an empty parade ring. We don't want horses racing and then coming back to nothing. We want a packed parade ring. We want competition. As I said, we want people to know who owns the horses as well, and for racegoers that are watching to see that action unfold in the parade ring. So I think that needs to be encouraged. Owners to go racing and to get owners racing, and to give owners perks at racing, whether it's the racecourse or whether, if you are a big syndicate, some sort of almost owners tent or some perks when they go racing. I think all of those things should be encouraged and celebrated.
Excellent. 3 really good suggestions to improve racing for the better. Thank you very much, Frankie. And thank you also for coming on Inside the Rails. We really enjoyed having you on. Hope you enjoy your racing in 2023. And no doubt Phil and I will be bumping into you many times at Great British Racing Ownership Days in the new year.
I'm sure you will, gents. Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. A pleasure to meet you both along the year as well, and to chat as we have.
Well, that was great to have Frankie on as a guest, wasn't it, Phil? Our first guest of the new year, somebody that we've met many times before, and nice for us to be asking him the questions. I have to say, I do like his 3 suggestions, particularly the third one, packing the paddocks full of owners. Now, there's a challenge for the racecourses.
Yeah, absolutely. I also enjoyed his point about breaking down that barrier of people saying, I don't know anything about racing. He said we hear that all the time, and we definitely do. And yeah, people shouldn't be afraid to make that a reason not to come. And I've just realised we had Francesca last month as a guest and Frankie this month. So it'd be a good trend to continue. Have you got Mr. Totori's phone number?
Oh, I see what you're doing there, Mr. B. Very, very clever, very clever. Not so sure about Frankie's, but I do have Rishi Persad's phone number, and he's agreed to come on as our next guest.
Ah, marvellous. So, yeah, there you go, listeners. We've got some good guests lined up. And, if you could carry on helping us by following the podcast so that you get all the new episodes automatically. If you could engage with our Twitter account, that would be great. And the best thing you can possibly do is tell all your friends about Inside the Rail so that we can continue to grow our listener base.
Well, that just leaves me to thank co-host Phil Boyle from BG Racing, our special guest broadcaster Frankie Foster, producer Callum Ronan from Callum Ronan Creative, and of course you, the listeners. From Aplutar, Alpinista and Appleby to Baid, Blackmore and Buick, racing has served up champions, both equine and human, in 2022. What awaits all racing fans in 2023? Let the stories unfold. Phil and I wish all racing professionals and all racing enthusiasts everywhere a very happy and prosperous new year. Goodbye.